The air was thick with the smell of rust and ash, a metallic tang that clung to the back of your throat and refused to let go. Out there, beyond the cracked hull of the Elysium Dawn, the stars burned cold and indifferent, witnesses to a war no one had seen coming. Captain Marcus Kane stood at the viewport, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles gleamed white against the dim emergency lighting. The crew moved silently behind him, shadows darting between flickering consoles, their faces drawn with exhaustion and something darker, something that tasted like fear but had hardened into resolve. They'd all heard the transmission, every last one of them, and it had changed everything. It had come crackling through the comms 3 hours ago, a garbled burst of static from the colony on Praxis 9. The voice belonged to a kid, couldn't have been more than 10, screaming, pleading, until it cut off with a wet, choking sound that still echoed in Marcus's skull. Then the Crixani had followed, their guttural language slithering through the speakers like oil over water. They'd issued their terms. Surrender the system, hand over the mining rights, and maybe, just maybe, they'd let the survivors limp back to Earth. No mention of the kids, no mention of the blood Marcus knew was pooling on the floors of those prefab homes. The Crixani didn't negotiate with prey. They devoured it. Marcus had warned them. 2 years back, when the first Crixani scout ships sniffed around the edge of human space, he'd been there, standing on the deck of a diplomatic frigate, staring down their ambassador, a 7-foot nightmare of chitin and claws. "Harm a human child," he'd said, voice steady as steel, "and you won't live to regret it." The translator had buzzed, spitting his words into their tongue, and the ambassador's mandibles had twitched, a sound like laughter scraping out of its throat. They hadn't believed him. They'd thought humans were soft, fragile, little more than cattle with delusions of grandeur. They'd been wrong. Now Praxis 9 was burning, and the Elysium Dawn was the closest ship in range. Marcus turned from the viewport, his gray eyes catching the light like a blade's edge. "Status," he barked, and Lieutenant Reza snapped to attention, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled up the scans. "They've got 3 warships in orbit," she said, voice tight. "Particle cannons hot, shields at full. Ground forces are entrenched. Looks like they've rounded up the colonists into holding pens. No life signs from the eastern sector. None." Marcus's jaw tightened. The eastern sector was where the school had been. He didn't need to ask what that meant. "And the kids?" Reza hesitated, her dark eyes flicking to the floor before meeting his again. "Some are still alive. Thermal scans show smaller heat signatures in the pens. But not many. Not many." The words hit like a punch to the gut, but Marcus didn't flinch. He couldn't. Not now. "Get me a line to the fleet," he said, "and arm everything we've got." The crew didn't question him. They'd seen the footage from the outer colonies, Crixani claws tearing through steel doors, families dragged screaming into the dark. Humans weren't the strongest species out here, not the fastest or the toughest, but they had something the Crixani didn't understand. A line you didn't cross, a promise you didn't break. And when that line was crossed, when that promise was shattered, humans didn't just fight. They burned the universe down to make it right. Within minutes, the Elysium Dawn hummed with power, its railguns charging, missiles locking into place. Marcus patched through to the fleet, his voice steady despite the rage boiling under his skin. "This is Captain Kane, Elysium Dawn. Praxis 9 is under attack. Crixani forces have killed our people, our kids. I'm going in. Anyone who's got the stomach for it, follow me. Anyone who doesn't, stay the hell out of my way." The response was immediate. Ships across the sector lit up the comms, freighters, haulers, even a few patched-up civilian rigs. No one said no. Not today. Marcus cut the line and turned to his crew. We're not here to negotiate. We're not here to survive. We're here to make them pay, every last one of them. Reza nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. The helmsman, a wiry kid named Torres, cracked his knuckles and grinned like he'd been waiting for this his whole life. The Elysium Dawn lurched forward, engines roaring as it broke from its patrol route and hurtled toward Praxis 9. The Crixani warships loomed on the scanners, their sleek insectoid hulls glinting against the planet's atmosphere. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know what humans became when you took something they loved. Marcus thought of that kid's voice, the scream cut short, and his hands tightened on the command console. The Crixani had been warned. They'd laughed. Now they'd learn. Space itself seemed to hold its breath as the Elysium Dawn closed the distance, a lone spark racing toward a firestorm, and in Marcus's chest, something cold and unyielding took root, a promise not just to fight, but to win. For the kids. For the blood already spilled. For the warning they'd ignored. The first shot rang out, a railgun slug tearing through the void, and the war began. The Elysium Dawn shuddered as the first Crixani particle beam grazed its hull, a searing streak of violet light that carved a molten scar across the port side. Alarms blared, a shrill cacophony that drowned out the crew's shouts as they scrambled to their stations. Marcus Kane gripped the edge of the command console, his gray eyes locked on the tactical display where red blips swarmed like hornets around the green dot of his ship. The Crixani warships were closing in, their movements precise, predatory, 3 against 1. Outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. Any sane captain would have turned tail and run. But Marcus wasn't sane anymore. Not after that kid's scream. Torres, evasive pattern Delta, he roared, voice cutting through the chaos. The helmsman's hands flew across the controls, and the ship lurched hard to starboard, engines screaming as they pushed past their limits. A second beam missed by inches, sizzling through the void where they'd been moments before. Reza, target their lead ship. Railguns and missiles, full spread. Hit them where it hurts. Lieutenant Reza didn't hesitate, her fingers dancing over the weapons console. Locked and loaded, sir. Firing now. The Elysium Dawn spat fury into the dark, railgun slugs accelerating to hypersonic speeds, followed by a salvo of missiles trailing fiery tails. The lead Crixani ship, a jagged monstrosity bristling with spines, took the brunt of it. Explosions bloomed across its hull, chunks of chitinous armor spinning into space, but it didn't falter. The Crixani built their ships like they built their bodies, hard, relentless, and damn near unbreakable. "They're returning fire!" Torres yelled, and the deck tilted as another beam slammed into the shields. The lights flickered, and Marcus felt the impact in his bones, a deep, rattling shudder that promised worse to come. The shields were holding, for now, but they wouldn't last forever. He didn't care. This wasn't about survival. This was about reaching Praxis 9, about getting to those pens where the kids were still alive, their tiny heat signatures flickering on the scans like candles in a storm. "Fleet's inbound, sir," Reza said, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. "ETA 10 minutes. They're patching through. Admiral Voss wants a word." "Put her on," Marcus growled. The comms crackled, and a woman's voice came through, sharp and clipped, the kind of voice that could cut glass. "Kane, what the hell are you doing? You're 1 ship against 3. You'll be scrap before we get there." Marcus didn't blink. "They've got our kids, Voss. Killed most of them already. I'm not waiting." A pause, heavy with static. Then, "You're insane, but we're coming. Hold them off, Kane. That's an order." "Wasn't planning on dying yet," he said, and cut the line. He turned to the crew, their faces lit by the glow of sparking consoles. "You heard her? 10 minutes. We keep them busy, we buy time for the fleet, and then we tear them apart." The Elysium Dawn dove into the fray, weaving through a storm of particle beams and kinetic rounds. Torres pushed the ship to its breaking point, dodging with a reckless grace that defied physics. Reza unleashed everything they had, missiles and railguns hammering the Crixani lead ship until its shields flickered and died. The first kill came with a satisfying flash. A missile punched through the enemy's hull, igniting its core in a silent, brilliant fireball. The crew didn't cheer. There was no time. The other two ships adjusted, their movements eerily synchronized, and the barrage intensified. Marcus's mind raced, replaying that transmission, the kid's voice breaking into sobs before the silence. He'd seen the colony logs before the attack. Praxis 9 had been a backwater, a speck of dirt with a few thousand souls, mostly miners and their families, kids who'd grown up chasing each other through dusty streets, dreaming of Earth they'd never seen. Now they were gone, or worse, caged by monsters who didn't even see them as alive, just meat to leverage a deal. His fists tightened until his nails bit into his palms, drawing blood. "Sir, shields at 30%, Reza called. "We can't take much more." "Then don't," Marcus snapped. "Ram the bastard if you have to. Just keep them off the planet." Torres shot him a wild grin. "You serious, Cap?" "Dead serious." The helmsman laughed, a sharp, jagged sound, and angled the Elysium Dawn toward the second Crixani ship. It was a desperate move, a suicide play, but Marcus didn't care. The Crixani had underestimated humans once, thinking them weak, pliable. They didn't know what happened when you backed a human into a corner, when you took their kids and left them nothing to lose. The ship surged forward, engines roaring, a battered arrow aimed at the heart of the enemy. And then the scanners lit up, green blips flooding in from the edge of the system. The fleet, freighters retrofitted with guns, haulers bristling with makeshift weapons, civilian ships that had no business in a fight, but were here anyway. Humans. Not soldiers, not warriors, just people who'd heard the same transmission Marcus had, who'd felt the same rage. The Crixani ships hesitated, their formation faltering as the odds shifted. Marcus bared his teeth in something that wasn't a smile. "Now," he said, "let's show them what happens when they don't listen." The Elysium Dawn struck, and the void erupted in fire. The Elysium Dawn collided with the second Crixani warship in a scream of metal and fire, a glancing blow that sent both ships spinning through the void. The impact threw Marcus Kane against the command console, his shoulder slamming into the edge with a crack he felt more than heard. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but he ignored it, hauling himself upright as the deck tilted beneath his feet. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and the air tasted of ozone and blood. The crew clung to their stations, faces pale but fierce, their eyes reflecting the chaos outside where the human fleet swarmed the Crixani like wolves on a wounded beast. "Damage report," Marcus shouted, his voice hoarse over the wail of alarms. Reza coughed, wiping a streak of soot from her face as she scanned the readouts. "Shields are gone, sir. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4. Emergency seals holding, but we've lost 2 railguns. Engines at 60%. "Enough to fight," Marcus said, more to himself than her. He straightened, ignoring the ache in his shoulder, and stared at the tactical display. The second Crixani ship was crippled, its hull venting atmosphere in shimmering plumes, but the third was still intact, its particle cannons carving through the human fleet with ruthless precision. Freighters exploded in silent bursts, civilian rigs torn apart before they could fire a shot. These weren't trained soldiers, just miners, traders, parents who'd grabbed whatever they could and come running. And they were dying. "Torres, get us between that bastard and the fleet," Marcus ordered. "Reza, reroute power to the forward guns. Everything we've got left." Torres didn't argue, though his grin had faded, replaced by a grim set to his jaw. The Elysium Dawn groaned as it turned, its engines sputtering but obedient, thrusting the battered ship into the line of fire. A particle beam raked across their bow, and the whole vessel shuddered, lights dimming as power drained to the weapons. Reza fired back, a desperate volley of missiles and railgun slugs that slammed into the third Crixani ship's shields, cracking them like glass. It wasn't enough to kill it, not yet, but it bought the fleet a breath, a chance to regroup. Marcus's gaze flicked to the planet below. Praxis 9's surface a smear of brown and gray through the atmosphere. Somewhere down there, the kids were still alive, trapped in those pens, waiting for someone to come. He could almost hear their cries, faint echoes of that transmission looping in his mind. He'd promised the Crixani they'd pay, and he meant it. But promises didn't mean a damn thing if he couldn't get to them. "Sir, incoming transmission," Reza said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "It's the Crixani." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Patch it through." The comms hissed, and that guttural, oily voice filled the bridge, the translator struggling to keep up. "Human vessel, you fight without honor. Surrender now, or we slaughter the young ones. One by one. Slowly." A chill swept through the crew, a collective intake of breath. Marcus felt it too, a spike of ice in his gut, but it burned away under the heat of his rage. He leaned into the comms, his voice low and lethal. "You think you can threaten us? You think that'll stop us? We warned you, harm a human child and you're done. Start killing, and I'll make sure your entire species feels it." The Crixani didn't respond immediately, its silence heavy, calculating. Then a sound came through. Not words, but a high, keening wail, unmistakably human. A child's scream, raw and terrified, cut off by a wet crunch. The line went dead. Marcus stood frozen, the sound searing into his soul. The bridge was silent, every eye on him, waiting. He turned to the viewport, staring at the Crixani ship, its insectoid bulk a dark stain against the stars. "Torres," he said, his voice a blade. "Full speed. Ram them." "Sir!" Reza started, but he cut her off with a look. "They just killed one of ours, on purpose, to make a point." His hands shook, not with fear but with a fury so deep it felt like it could crack the hull. "We're not waiting for the fleet. We end this now." Torres nodded, his hand steady as he pushed the throttle to its limit. The Elysium Dawn surged forward, a dying beast with one last fight in it, aimed straight at the Crixani ship. The enemy fired, beams tearing into the hull. But Marcus didn't flinch. He saw the pens in his mind, the kids huddling together, their parents gone, their hope fading. He saw that ambassador's twitching mandibles, the laughter that had mocked his warning. They'd thought humans were weak. They'd thought wrong. The fleet rallied behind them, inspired or insane, it didn't matter. Ships of every make and model charging into the fray. The Crixani ship loomed closer, its shields flickering under the Elysium Dawn's relentless barrage. Marcus braced himself, the collision seconds away, when a new blip appeared on the scanners, massive, fast, and human. A dreadnought, the Vindicator flagship of the sector fleet, dropping out of hyperspace with guns blazing. "Hold course!" Marcus barked, and the Elysium Dawn struck, a glancing blow that ripped through the Crixani's weakened shields. The Vindicator followed, its cannons unleashing hell, and the enemy ship erupted in a cascade of fire and debris. Marcus exhaled, his breath ragged, but there was no relief. Only the burning need to get to the surface. The kids were still down there, and the Crixani weren't done paying. The Elysium Dawn hung in the void, a broken husk trailing smoke and sparks, its hull scarred from the collision that had crippled the last Crixani warship. Marcus Kane stood amidst the wreckage of the bridge, his breath fogging in the cold as emergency systems struggled to keep the ship alive. The Vindicator loomed nearby, mopping up the debris with surgical precision, but Marcus's eyes were fixed on Praxis 9 below. The kids were still down there, their faint heat signatures a fragile thread pulling him forward. That scream over the comms, cut short by a Crixani claw, played on a loop in his skull, fueling a rage that drowned out the pain in his shoulder. "Reza, can we land?" he asked, voice rough as gravel. She glanced at the flickering consoles, her face grim. "Engines are barely holding, sir. We've got one shot, crash landing maybe. No guarantees we walk away." "Do it," Marcus said without hesitation. "Torres, plot us a course, straight for those pens." Torres nodded, hands shaking as he wrestled the dying ship into position. The Elysium Dawn groaned, its frame trembling as it nosed toward the planet. The Vindicator hailed them, Admiral Voss's voice crackling through. "Kane, stand down. We'll handle the ground assault. You're in no shape to fight." "They're killing kids, Voss," Marcus snapped. "I'm not waiting." He cut the line, ignoring her protests. The descent began, a fiery plunge through the atmosphere that rattled the ship apart. Bulkheads buckled, and a section of the ceiling collapsed, nearly crushing Reza. She cursed, dragging herself free, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. The ground rushed up, a blur of dust and ruin, and the Elysium Dawn hit hard, skidding across Praxis 9's surface in a shower of dirt and metal. Marcus was thrown forward, slamming into the viewport, but he forced himself up, adrenaline numbing the pain. "Gear up," he barked, grabbing a rifle from the armory rack. The crew followed, battered but unbroken, their faces set with the same fire burning in him. They spilled out into a wasteland of shattered homes and smoldering craters. The air stank of death, and in the distance, the Crixani pens loomed, crude cages of twisted steel. Marcus moved fast, his boots crunching over debris until he saw them. Dozens of kids, filthy and wide-eyed, pressed against the bars. A Crixani guard turned, its claws dripping red, and Marcus fired without thinking, the slug punching through its skull. The kids screamed, some sobbing, others staring in silence as Marcus tore the cage open. "You're safe now," he lied, knowing more Crixani were coming. He looked into their hollow eyes, saw the cost of his delay, and swore the bastards would pay in blood. The Vindicator's dropships roared overhead, but Marcus was already moving, rifle raised, ready to finish what he'd started. Dust swirled around Marcus Kane as he knelt by the shattered cage, his rifle still warm from the shot that had dropped the Crixani guard. The kids stumbled out, some clinging to each other, others too stunned to move, their small bodies trembling under layers of grime and fear. A girl, no older than 8, stared up at him with eyes like cracked glass, her voice a whisper. "They took my brother." Marcus's chest tightened, the weight of her words sinking into him like a blade. He wanted to promise he'd find the boy, bring him back, but the lie stuck in his throat. He'd heard the crunch over the comms. He knew what it meant. "Stay close," he said instead, his voice rough but steady. "We're getting you out." The crew fanned out, forming a ragged perimeter around the kids. Reza, with her pistol drawn, Torres clutching a shotgun, their faces hard despite the exhaustion carving lines into their skin. Above, the Vindicator's dropships touched down, kicking up storms of dirt as Marines poured out, their armor gleaming against the desolation. But Marcus didn't wait for them. He couldn't. The Crixani were still here, their guttural roars echoing from the ruins, and every second meant another life snuffed out. He led the group forward, weaving through the wreckage of Praxis 9's streets. Prefab homes reduced to twisted metal, playgrounds buried under ash. The kids shuffled behind him, their footsteps soft but heavy with the silence of trauma. Reza flanked him, her breath ragged, the gash on her forehead still bleeding. "Scanners picked up movement, sir," she muttered. 200 meters east. Big group. They're coming." "Let them," Marcus growled, his grip tightening on the rifle. He glanced back at the kids, their pale faces lit by the flicker of distant fires, and felt that cold, unyielding thing in his chest twist sharper. The Crixani hadn't just attacked a colony. They'd targeted the weakest, the ones humans would die to protect. It wasn't strategy, it was cruelty, and it was a mistake. The first wave hit like a storm, Crixani warriors charging from the shadows, their claws glinting, mandibles snapping with that sickening click. Marcus fired, slugs tearing through chitin, dropping 2 before they could close the gap. Torres roared, his shotgun blasting a third into a spray of gore, while Reza picked off stragglers with precise, furious shots. The kids screamed, huddling behind a fallen wall as the fight turned brutal. Claws raked at Marcus's arm, slicing through his suit, but he drove his rifle butt into the creature's skull, feeling it crack under the blow. The Marines arrived mid-chaos, their rifles lighting up the night, and the Crixani faltered, their numbers thinning. Marcus didn't stop, pushing forward, his vision narrowing to the next target, then the next. Blood slicked his hands. His own. Theirs, it didn't matter. He saw that ambassador's laughter in every twitching mandible, heard that kid scream in every clash of steel and bone. They'd been warned. They hadn't listened. A shadow loomed ahead, a Crixani commander, taller than the rest, its armor scarred and dripping with red. It held a human arm, small and limp, like a trophy. Marcus froze, the sight punching through his rage into something raw, something that hurt. The commander hissed, its voice grating through the translator. "You fight for nothing, human. Your young are gone. Your world will follow." Marcus didn't answer with words. He charged, rifle blazing, rounds slamming into the commander's chest. It staggered but swung, claws slashing across his side, tearing flesh. Pain seared through him, but he dropped the rifle, drew his knife, and drove it into the creature's throat, twisting until black ichor sprayed his face. It collapsed, gurgling, and he stood over it, breathing hard, the arm still clutched in its dead grip. He turned, ignoring the agony in his side, and saw the kids watching, wide-eyed, silent. The Marines swept in, securing the area, but Marcus barely noticed. He knelt, picking up the arm, its tiny fingers curled as if reaching for something lost. It was too small, too fragile, and it broke something in him he hadn't known was still whole. He set it down gently, his hands shaking, and looked at the girl who'd spoken earlier. She was crying now, quiet sobs that cut deeper than any claw. "We're not done," he said, more to himself than her. The Crixani had retreated, but their ships still orbited, their forces still held parts of the planet. The Vindicator could handle the sky, but the ground was his. He stood, wincing as blood seeped through his torn suit, and nodded to Reza. "Round up the survivors. We're hunting." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to his wounds. "Sir, you need—" "I need them dead," he cut her off, his voice a low snarl. "Every last one." He turned east, where the scanners had pinged, and started walking, the kids' soft steps trailing behind him like ghosts. The war wasn't over. Not until the Crixani learned what humans did when you crossed that line. The wind howled across Praxis 9's ruined landscape, carrying the stench of charred metal and alien blood, as Marcus Kane led his ragged band eastward. His side throbbed with every step, the gash from the Crixani commander's claws leaking through the hasty bandage Reza had slapped on during a brief pause. The kids trailed behind, a silent procession of hollow eyes and trembling hands, their trust in him a weight heavier than the rifle slung across his back. He didn't look at them. Couldn't. Afraid he'd see that small, severed arm in every shadow, a reminder of how late he'd been. Reza marched beside him, her pistol gripped tight, her face a mask of determination despite the blood crusting her forehead. Torres brought up the rear, shotgun ready, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet intensity that matched the Marines fanning out around them. The Vindicator's dropships had secured the landing zone, but the Crixani still held ground, entrenched in the eastern sector, where the scanners had last pinged a mass of heat signatures. Marcus didn't know if it was more kids or just soldiers waiting to die. Either way, he was coming for them. The terrain shifted as they approached, a sprawl of mining rigs and storage silos, twisted into a jagged maze by the attack. The air grew thick, heavy with the hum of Crixani tech, a low vibration that set Marcus's teeth on edge. He raised a fist, signaling the group to halt, and crouched behind a toppled crane. Ahead, the enemy waited, a fortified outpost, its walls bristling with turrets, Crixani warriors pacing like ants around a nest, and there, in the center, another pen, smaller, cruder, but unmistakable. More kids. Marcus's breath caught, his rage flaring anew. He counted at least 20 guards, their claws glinting in the dim light, and 2 hulking figures, elites, maybe, their armor thicker, movements deliberate. The turrets swiveled, scanning the perimeter, and he knew a frontal assault would be suicide. But waiting wasn't an option, not with those kids so close, their faint cries drifting on the wind. "Reza, Torres, flank left with half the Marines," he whispered, his voice a low growl. "Draw their fire. I'll take the rest right. Hit the pen directly." Reza's eyes narrowed. "Sir, you're bleeding out. Let me—" "No!" he snapped, cutting her off. "They don't get another second with those kids." She held his gaze, then nodded, slipping away with Torres and a handful of Marines. Marcus turned to the remaining soldiers, their faces grim but resolute. "Fast and hard. We get in, get the kids, get out. No heroics, just results." The plan ignited moments later. Reza's team opened fire from the left, a barrage of bullets and grenades that lit up the night. The Crixani reacted instantly, turrets swinging, warriors charging toward the distraction. Marcus moved, leading his group in a sprint across open ground, his side screaming with every stride. A turret caught them mid-run, its beam slicing through a Marine beside him, reducing the man to ash. Marcus didn't stop, didn't flinch, his focus locked on the pen. He reached it first, slamming into the bars with a shoulder that nearly gave out. Inside, a dozen kids cowered, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. A Crixani elite loomed over them, its claw raised, but Marcus was faster. His rifle barked, slugs tearing through its chest. It staggered, roaring, and he fired again, dropping it in a heap. The Marines caught up, blasting the lock, and the cage sprang open. "Move!" Marcus shouted, ushering the kids out. They stumbled toward him, some too weak to stand, and he scooped up a boy who couldn't have weighed more than a rifle clip, his thin frame shaking against Marcus's chest. The outpost erupted around them, Reza's team still drawing fire, the Crixani regrouping, their roars growing louder. A second elite charged, its claws slashing, and Marcus shoved the boy behind him, taking the hit across his arm. Blood sprayed, but he drove his knife into the creature's eye, twisting until it fell. The Marines formed a shield, firing as they retreated, the kids between them. Marcus limped at the rear, his vision blurring, the boy clinging to his leg. He saw Reza and Torres breaking back toward them, their faces bloodied but alive, and felt a flicker of relief. But it died fast. The ground shook, a deep rumble rising from the outpost. A Crixani war machine, a towering beast of metal and claws, emerged from the shadows, its cannons glowing hot. "Run!" Marcus yelled, shoving the kids toward the Marines. He turned to face it, alone now, his rifle raised despite the blood pooling at his feet. The machine advanced, its roar deafening, and he bared his teeth. They'd taken too much already. He wasn't giving them this. Overhead, the Vindicator's guns thundered, a salvo raining down, but Marcus didn't look up. He fired, a futile gesture, and braced for the end. The Crixani war machine loomed over Marcus Kane, a colossus of jagged steel and glowing death, its cannons whining as they charged. His rifle spat slugs into its armored hide, sparks flaring where they struck, but it was like throwing pebbles at a tidal wave. Blood dripped from his arm and side, pooling in the dust at his feet, and his legs trembled, threatening to buckle. Behind him, the kids' footsteps faded as the Marines hustled them away, their cries swallowed by the roar of the Vindicator's orbital barrage. The sky lit up, streaks of fire raining down, but the machine kept coming, its claws raking the ground inches from where he stood. Marcus didn't move. He couldn't. Not with the kids so close to safety, not with the promise he'd made burning in his chest. The Crixani had laughed at his warning, torn apart everything he'd sworn to protect. And now they'd pay, even if it cost him everything. He dropped the empty rifle, drew his knife, and squared his shoulders, a snarl twisting his lips. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered, voice lost in the chaos. "Let's finish this." The machine lunged, a claw swiping down, and Marcus dove aside, the impact cratering the earth where he'd been. Pain exploded through his wounds, but he rolled to his feet, slashing at a hydraulic line on its leg. Black fluid sprayed, and the machine staggered, its cannons firing wild, carving gouges into the ruins. Above, the Vindicator's salvos hammered closer, one slamming into the outpost's wall, sending debris raining down. Marcus ducked under another claw, his knife finding a joint, and twisted until something snapped. The machine screeched, a sound that rattled his bones, but it wasn't enough. He heard Reza shouting his name, distant and desperate, and glanced back to see her sprinting toward him, Torres at her side, their weapons blazing. "Get back!" he roared, but they didn't stop, firing at the machine's sensors, drawing its attention. A cannon swung toward them, and Marcus's heart lurched. He threw himself at its leg, stabbing deep, anything to keep it focused on him. The beam fired, missing Reza by a hair, and she stumbled, cursing, but kept coming. The ground shook again, not from the machine but from something new, dropships, more Marines, their engines a thunderous chorus, reinforcements from the Vindicator, hitting the dirt hard, their rifles cutting through the Crixani stragglers swarming from the outpost. The machine turned, distracted, and Marcus seized the chance, climbing its leg, his blood-slick hands slipping as he hauled himself toward its core. Every move was agony, his vision swimming, but he saw those kids' faces, the girl's cracked glass eyes, the boy's frail grip, and pushed harder. Reza reached him first, grabbing his leg to steady him as he stabbed into a glowing panel. "You're insane, sir!" she yelled, her voice raw. Torres joined her, blasting at the machine's joints, and together they fought, a desperate trio against a titan. The panel sparked, then erupted, and the machine convulsed, throwing Marcus off. He hit the ground hard, air rushing from his lungs, and watched as it staggered, cannons dimming, before a final Vindicator strike tore through its chest, reducing it to a smoking wreck. Silence fell, heavy and surreal, broken only by the crackle of flames and the hum of dropships. Marcus lay there, chest heaving, blood soaking the dirt beneath him. Reza dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against his side, her face pale. "Stay with me, damn it," she said, her voice cracking. Torres stood guard, shotgun trembling in his grip, his eyes scanning the ruins for more threats. The Marines swept in, securing the kids, their voices a distant buzz. Marcus forced himself up, ignoring Reza's protests, and staggered toward the group. The girl from the pen was there, clutching a younger boy, her tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "You came back," she whispered, and it hit him harder than any claw, because he almost hadn't. "We're not done," he rasped, looking past her to the horizon where Crixani ships still darkened the sky. The Vindicator had cleared the orbit, but pockets of resistance remained on the ground, and Marcus knew they'd fight to the last. He turned to Reza, his voice steady despite the pain. "Get the kids to the dropships, I'm finishing this." "Sir, you can barely stand," she argued, but he shook his head. "They don't get to walk away from this," he said, his gray eyes cold as steel. "Not after what they did?" He picked up a fallen rifle, checked the clip, and started walking, the weight of his promise driving him forward. The kids were safe for now, but the Crixani hadn't paid enough. Not yet. Reza cursed under her breath, then followed, Torres at her side. The Marines rallied behind them, a battered army of humans who'd lost too much to stop. The war wasn't over. It wouldn't be until every last Crixani learned what happened when you crossed that line. The horizon glowed with the faint orange of Praxis 9's dawn, a cruel mockery of peace over a world soaked in blood and ash. Marcus Kane limped through the wreckage, his rifle a crutch as much as a weapon, each step a defiance of the pain tearing through his body. His side was a mess of blood and torn flesh, his arm numb from the elbow down, but he kept moving, driven by a fire that refused to die. Behind him, Reza and Torres flanked the Marines, their faces grim, their weapons stained with Crixani ichor. The kids were safe, ferried to the Vindicator's dropships, but Marcus wasn't done. Not while a single Crixani still breathed on this rock. The last stronghold lay ahead, a mining complex turned fortress, its walls reinforced with scavenged steel, Crixani warriors swarming like a hive kicked open. The Vindicator had pounded it from orbit, but the survivors dug in, their guttural roars a challenge Marcus couldn't ignore. He'd seen too much. The pens, the severed arm, the girl's cracked glass eyes, to let them slink away. They'd been warned. They'd laughed. Now they'd face the consequences. "Reza, Torres, left flank," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper but sharp as a blade. "Marines, with me. We hit the center, no mercy." Reza hesitated, her eyes flicking to his wounds, but he glared her down, and she nodded, slipping away with Torres. The Marines fanned out, their boots crunching over debris, their silence a testament to what they'd lost. Marcus led them forward, a battered figure at the head of a storm. The Crixani met them head-on, claws flashing, turrets spitting fire. Marcus fired, his rifle bucking against his shoulder, slugs tearing through chitin. A warrior lunged and he sidestepped, driving his knife into its throat, feeling the hot spray of ichor on his face. The Marines fought beside him, a wall of human fury, their rifles and grenades turning the courtyard into a slaughterhouse. From the left, Reza and Torres struck, their attack splitting the enemy's focus, and the Crixani line buckled. Marcus pushed deeper, his vision blurring, his breath ragged. He saw a Crixani commander, smaller than the last, but its armor gleamed with rank, directing the defense from a raised platform. It locked eyes with him, mandibles twitching, and he knew it recognized him, knew what he'd come to do. He charged, ignoring the pain, the blood, the screams around him. A claw raked his leg, but he kept going, slamming into the commander, his knife finding its chest. They fell together, a tangle of steel and flesh, and he stabbed again and again until it stopped moving. The fight drained from the Crixani then, their roars turning to shrieks as the humans closed in. Marcus staggered to his feet, leaning on the platform's edge, watching as the last of them fell. The complex grew quiet, the only sounds the crackle of fires and the distant hum of dropships. Reza appeared at his side, her face streaked with dirt and blood, her pistol still smoking. "It's over, sir," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They're gone." Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked out over the ruins, the bodies, human and Crixani alike, littering the ground. He thought of the kids, safe now, but scarred forever, of the families who'd never know this dawn. "Not over," he muttered, his gray eyes hard. "Not until they're all gone. Every last one, everywhere." Reza didn't argue. She knew him too well. Torres joined them, his shotgun slung over his shoulder, a rare quiet in his eyes. The Marines gathered, their faces a mix of exhaustion and resolve, and Marcus felt it. The unspoken bond, the shared promise. Humans weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the toughest, but they didn't break. Not when it mattered. He turned to the sky, where the Vindicator hung like a sentinel, its guns silent now. The Crixani had underestimated them, thought them weak, prey to be culled. They'd learned too late what humans became when you crossed that line, when you harmed their kids. Marcus had warned them, and he'd kept his word. Praxis 9 was free, its survivors safe, but the war stretched beyond this planet, into the stars where the Crixani still lurked. "Get me to a ship," he said, his voice steady despite the tremble in his limbs. "We're not stopping here." Reza nodded, helping him stand, and the group moved toward the dropships, a battered army ready for the next fight. The kids would heal, in time, but Marcus wouldn't. Not until the Crixani were a memory, a lesson carved into the galaxy. Harm a human child, and you won't live to regret it. As the dropship lifted off, Marcus looked down at Praxis 9, its scars fading into the distance. He closed his eyes, the girl's whisper echoing in his mind. "You came back," and made a silent vow. He'd keep coming back, again and again, until there was nothing left to fight. For them, for all of them. They said we were children. That's what the Galactic Council called us when they first welcomed Earth into their shining empire of stars. Children. Curious, chaotic, clever, but ultimately harmless. We were their pet project. The youngest species to join their sacred fold. So young, in fact, they didn't even bother to offer us a vote. No power, no say. Just smiles, data sharing, and treaties written in a dozen languages we didn't understand. At first, we were grateful, overwhelmed by the gift of knowledge. Hyperspace lanes, gravity tech, medical nanites that eradicated cancer in a week. These were miracles. To us, the Council was salvation. But we were naive, desperate, blind to the way their eyes never truly saw us as equals. And then came the war. It wasn't ours. It started in the outer belt, between the Ralveth and the Drell. Two ancient species with 1,000 years of hate between them. Their blood feud reignited, and suddenly stars were going dark, worlds burning, refugees flooding every sector, and Earth was asked to help. We did. Against every warning, we stepped in. Not with fleets or firepower, we didn't have much then, but with resolve, with stubbornness, with that damnable human thing the Council never understood. Sacrifice. Our diplomats brokered ceasefires. Our medics tended to Drell and Ralveth alike. Our freighters delivered aid through contested war zones, shields barely holding. And when things escalated, when the war spilled into the core systems and the Council's own planets were threatened, we sent our fleets. Not because we were asked, not because we were ready, but because no one else would. We lost half our navy in the opening month. But the Council survived. Because of us. And when it was over, when the Drell homeworld was glassed and the Ralveth were shattered into diaspora, we didn't ask for praise, not even reparations. We asked for a seat, not as children, not as guests, as equals. The vote was held in secret. We only found out the result when the broadcast leaked 2 weeks later. A unanimous decision, 12 races, 12 votes. Earth denied. Not enough cultural maturity, they said. Too impulsive, too emotional, too dangerous. Dangerous. That word lit a fuse in every heart back home. They used us, let us bleed for them, die for them. And when the war was done and the galaxy was safe again, they tossed us back to the kiddie table. I remember the riots, cities erupting not just in anger, but grief. Parents screamed into empty skies for the sons and daughters who wouldn't come home. Veterans burned their uniforms in the streets. And amidst it all, one message echoed louder than all the rest. Never again. The shift happened slowly at first. Budget reallocations, quiet construction yards in Mars' orbit, dark projects resurrected beneath Luna's surface. The Council watched, of course. They always did. But they underestimated how good we'd become at hiding things. They thought our rage would fade. They thought wrong. The man watching the Council's broadcast in a dim, war-scarred room knew exactly how wrong they were. General Torin Vex didn't blink as the Council's High Arbiter droned on in that oily, patronizing tone. Speaking of galactic harmony and necessary containment protocols. His knuckles tightened around the glass in his hand. Bourbon, imported from Earth. The last batch, probably. The blockade had seen to that. Containment, huh? They'd sealed Earth behind trade walls, sanctioned every human-aligned colony, and declared us a developmental threat to interstellar peace. To hell with them. Behind Torin, the holomap of the sector glowed red. Human fleets, once scattered and underpowered, were now moving in calculated silence. Tight formations, black ops squadrons, weapons that had never seen the light of day. He turned as a younger officer entered the room. "Sir, transmission from the Titan. Admiral Reyes confirms position at Enceladus. All ships cloaked and ready." Torin nodded. "And the signal?" "Prepped." "Send it." The officer hesitated. "That's a point of no return, sir." Torin stared at the screen again. The council chamber filled with smug, scaled, feathered faces. "They crossed that point when they betrayed us," he said. "Let's show them what dangerous really means." The officer saluted, turned, and vanished into the corridor. And far across the void, a dozen human ships powered up weapons no council species had ever seen. Technology born not from peace, but from rage, from betrayal, from the promise that humanity would never be someone else's pawn again. There was a time when humanity dreamed of the stars with wide-eyed wonder. That time was over. Enceladus was silent beneath its icy shell. The council knew little about what lay beneath that frost, only that it was one of Saturn's moons, and of minor strategic value. That ignorance had been carefully cultivated over years. While the galaxy dismissed Earth as emotionally unstable and technologically erratic, humanity had been repurposing forgotten corners of its system into war factories and listening posts. Admiral Reyes stood aboard the ISS Titan, a dreadnought-class ship designed in secret, forged in the cold crucible of betrayal. Its hull shimmered with grav reflective plating, a human invention the Council had called theoretical nonsense. And yet here it was, real, cloaked, and armed with weapons calibrated to dismantle Council shielding algorithms. "Signal sent," came the voice of her tactical officer, softly, reverently. Reyes didn't smile. She simply looked at the holofeed. The Council was still talking, still unaware. "This isn't a declaration of war," she whispered. more to herself than anyone else. It's the consequence of arrogance. Around her, her crew stood silent. Each one had lost someone, a sibling, a parent, a lover. None of them served out of duty anymore. They served out of memory. They served because the council had looked them in the eyes and called their sacrifice a mistake. Engines igniting, weapons warming. She gave the order with no hesitation. Fire! 3 council ships blinked off the galactic grid in less than 6 seconds. No warning, no demands, no ceremony, just erasure. The explosion was felt in every system relay. Alarms blared across council stations. The High Arbiter's speech was cut short by distant sirens and sudden chaos. On Earth, the footage hit within minutes, and instead of fear, it brought something different. A release. Screens across the globe lit up with breaking headlines. Humanity strikes back. No more chains. The first salvo. Some cheered. Others wept. But no one was silent. The council convened an emergency summit within the hour. 12 species, 12 voices shouting over one another. Accusations, demands, panic. They activated the peacekeepers, called in the elder fleets. But it was too late for control. The myth had shattered. The myth that humans could be tamed. Back on Earth, buried under the old mountain ranges of Colorado, the real war room thrummed with energy. General Torin Vex watched the chaos unfold on the main screen, arms crossed, face stone. "We shouldn't have waited this long," said Director Nyla Varin, head of the Interstellar Intelligence Network. Her voice was sharp, brittle with years of bitterness. "We gave them everything, Torin. They spat in our face and called it diplomacy." "We weren't ready," Torin replied quietly. "We are now." He didn't deny it. The council had relied too long on a single assumption, that humans were fractured, unpredictable, emotional. They were right. But what they never understood was that emotion doesn't make us weak. It makes us relentless. Out in the frontier systems, humanity's hidden allies emerged. Colonies once claimed as rogue outposts were now beacons of resistance. Old council client species, oppressed, overlooked, began to whisper of rebellion. They remembered the humans who'd fought for them during the war. The medics who crossed fire lines, the engineers who rebuilt what the council refused to touch. And now, humanity had become something more than a species, a symbol, not of peace, not of order, but of reckoning. The council responded the only way they knew how, with fear. A blockade around Sol, sanctions that froze trade, seized assets, imprisoned human ambassadors, and then came the ultimatum: disarm or face annihilation. The message came encoded in a format from Earth's first year in the council, like a slap across the face. Torin read the text once, then deleted it. "Tell them," he said to the comms officer, "that we already faced annihilation, and we survived. And if they don't listen," Torin met her gaze, "then they'll learn something new." In a distant corridor of council space, a fleet of unmarked ships exited slipspace. Their IDs didn't register. Their tech didn't match any known configuration, because it wasn't council-made. It was human, built in secret, fueled by anger. Crew trained in simulations based on the council's own war logs, leaked, stolen, decrypted over years of watching and waiting. The lead ship sent a message to the council defense array guarding the outer ring. "We remember your betrayal." And then the array exploded. The galaxy had thought humans were impulsive, but the truth was far worse. Humans were patient. They didn't just want war. They wanted the council to feel it, the way they had felt forgotten, dismissed, and used. And the rage? It had only just begun. The council still didn't understand. Even after the outer defense ring fell, even after 3 colonies defected overnight, even after their fleets encountered human vessels with cloaking fields that shouldn't exist, and weapons that burned through shields like paper. They didn't understand. Because the Council had never been afraid before. They had crushed rebellions, quelled insurgents, silenced dissent. But they had never fought an enemy who knew them. That was humanity's secret weapon. Not the tech, not the ships, the memory. We had studied them. All of them. Every tactical doctrine, every psychological weakness, every ego-driven blind spot. For decades we played nice, nodding along, pretending to be grateful. All while recording, analyzing, preparing. The betrayal had simply accelerated the clock. And now, the galaxy was burning with the knowledge that the smallest child at the table had teeth. Deep inside the Archeon Spire, Council headquarters on the core world of Verith, the High Arbiter watched the reports scroll in with growing horror. Unknown vessels near the Tracian moons. Refinery destroyed in the Urian system. Council patrol fleet obliterated. No survivors. He had never seen the Council chambers so quiet. The Drell ambassador was shaking, translucent fingers tapping against his armrest. This is not war, it's execution. They've hacked our long-range comms, said the Vael Shari representative, her tone trembling. They're intercepting fleet orders before we even give them. It's impossible, someone muttered. But it wasn't. Because for the first time, the Council wasn't fighting a fringe uprising. They were fighting humanity with a plan. On the bridge of the ISS Titan, Admiral Reyes stared at a star map that was no longer theoretical. Each marked point had been a Council foothold a week ago. Now those systems were silent, occupied, or ash. She traced a gloved finger across the next target. This one hurts, she muttered. Borealis Station. Her XO, Captain Hurst, raised an eyebrow. Old science outpost? Number It was where they signed the treaty, the one that made us a protectorate instead of a partner. Hurst nodded slowly. Symbolic strike, then. Reyes clenched her jaw. Number It's a message. And she gave the order. Back on Earth, protests had turned to parades. Humanity wasn't hiding anymore. Monuments were going up, names etched into obsidian slabs, lit by eternal fire. Not generals, not leaders, fallen medics, aid workers, young soldiers who volunteered for peacekeeping and came home in boxes while the Council smiled and said nothing. General Torin Vex stood at the base of the newest memorial, flanked by diplomats and former colonists. His face was tired, grizzled, and lined with the weight of a war that wasn't declared, but had always been coming. A reporter pushed through the crowd. "General, how far will humanity go?" He looked her in the eye. "As far as they made us." In the shadows beyond the galactic rim, not every species was mourning the Council's fall. The Ashari Syndicate, black market kings of the void, watched from their asteroid fortresses, amused. About damn time, they said. The Grith, nomads scattered across unclaimed space, whispered tales around their campfires of Earth's burning rage, and smiled. Finally, someone was standing up to the gods, and within the ranks of the Council itself, cracks began to form. A junior delegate from the Ralveth Confederacy leaked confidential documents, proof that Earth had been sabotaged during the war, that their fleets were sent into unwinnable battles to shield Council worlds, that their losses were intentional. The file went viral. The galaxy turned. Torin Vex sat alone in his office when the news hit. He didn't cheer, didn't smirk. He just closed his eyes. "They're finally seeing it," said a voice behind him. It was Nyla Varen, the spy master. "They're seeing what we saw," Torin said. "Too late." Nyla stepped forward, dropping a fresh report on his desk. The Borealis strike succeeded. Council has pulled back from the inner belt. They're rattled, starting to eat their own. He looked up. "And?" She hesitated. They're calling for a peace summit. Silence. Then Torin laughed. Short, bitter. Now they want to talk. But humanity wasn't the same species that had begged for a seat at the table. Now, we built our own table, out of steel, blood, and memory. And if the Council wanted peace, they'd have to sit at our table. And listen. Really listen. To every scream, every cry, every voice they silenced when they thought we were nothing. Because this wasn't just vengeance, it was justice, and we had only just begun collecting the debt. The Peace Summit was held in the Caltheris Drift, a dead zone in neutral space, far from any Council stronghold or human fleet. It was symbolic, a place without allegiance, a void untouched by blood or banners. A fitting grave for old illusions. The Council sent 7 envoys. Not 12. Not even 10. Some had gone silent. Others were too afraid to leave their fortified systems. And of course, Earth sent no one. Not at first. For 3 days, the Council envoys waited, postured, issued empty communiques laced with diplomatic poetry and veiled threats. And then, on the 4th day, the lights dimmed across the drift. One by one, the stars around the station flickered. Not out of failure. Cloaking fields. Dozens of human ships emerged from the black like ghosts, surrounding the station in complete silence. No weapons charged, no shots fired. But the message was clear. We see you. We're here. You're not in control. They arrived aboard a single cruiser. The Resolve, sleek and scarred, its hull bearing the emblems of every human faction, military, civilian, colonial. At its helm was a woman the galaxy hadn't seen before, Ambassador Helena Voss, young, quiet, deadly calm. She wore no insignia, no medals, just black, a memorial in motion. When she entered the Council chamber, no guards stopped her. They didn't dare. She sat, folded her hands, and waited. The silence was suffocating. The High Arbiter, voice shaky, finally spoke. Ambassador Voss, we are grateful for your presence. Her gaze was ice. No, you're afraid of it. Humanity has made its anger clear. But if we are to avoid further bloodshed, you mean your blood. He hesitated. She leaned forward. Let's be honest, shall we? You didn't come here to make peace. You came to beg for control. You want to leash us again. Wrap your decrees in flowery language and call it order. But it's too late for that. Humanity's actions threaten galactic stability. You mean your stability. The room was still. The other envoys didn't speak. Some looked away. You called us children, she whispered. But the truth is you never wanted us to grow, because you knew what would happen when we did. She stood. Now you're living it. The summit collapsed within the hour. No treaty, no agreement, only fear. And in the shadows of the drift, as the Resolve departed, a message pinged across secure Council channels, not from Helena, from Earth, encrypted, final. You don't get to erase what we remember. You don't get to define who we become. Elsewhere, the war deepened. Council strongholds were overwhelmed not just by human fleets, but by defections. Whole battalions of lesser species, once loyal to the Council, now changed sides. They fought under a new banner, the Terran Accord. Not just humans, not anymore. It was an alliance of the betrayed. And the Council? It fractured. The Kelton withdrew entirely, citing internal unrest. The Ralveth signed a non-aggression pact with the Accord. And the Veilshari leadership? Assassinated from within. A new faction rose, waving the Terran sigil in their cities. The Council's power wasn't just waning, it was collapsing. But victory breeds its own poison. General Torin Vex sat in his war room, staring at casualty reports. Not Council losses. Ours. A failed assault on Arva Prime. Civilian deaths. Entire colonies destabilized. Some humans, drunk on vengeance, had gone too far. Rogue captains, vigilante fleets. They weren't fighting for justice anymore. They were hunting. Torin turned to Nyla Varen, her face grim. "We're losing control of our own people," she nodded. "Some don't want justice, they want dominance." He stood slowly, spine heavy with guilt. "That's not what we started. Number, but it might be what we become." And far across the galaxy, in a chamber sealed in shadow, a new council formed. Not of the old guard, not of the cowards and opportunists, but of something worse. The survivors, the manipulators, the ones who had always seen humans as a threat, and now had the proof to rally others behind that fear. They began to plan. And this time, it wouldn't be containment. It would be eradication. Humanity had always feared the dark. Now it had become it. The Terran Accord was spreading faster than anyone expected. Not through conquest, at least not at first. Through hope, through whispers carried across trade routes and pirate bands, through smugglers and refugees and broken soldiers. Worlds that had once feared Earth now looked to it as a salvation from the rot. But not everyone in the Accord believed in mercy. Captain Juno Thane of the rogue vessel Crucible didn't care for treaties or codes. She'd lost her sister at the Battle of Garl, ordered to hold position as a council fleet, mistakenly opened fire. They called it miscommunication. She called it a massacre. And now she was done waiting for permission. The Crucible had raised 3 former council outposts in the last week. No survivors, no prisoners. Torin Vex had sent recall orders. Juno ignored them. The Accord's signal didn't reach her anymore, because the deeper this war went, the more it fractured. Some wanted justice, others wanted revenge, and only blood would satisfy them. Admiral Reyes watched the internal briefing in silence. Rogue captains, civilian casualties, retaliations spiraling out of control. She had once believed in clarity. Now the line between right and wrong was buried under ashes. "We're turning into them," whispered her XO. Reyes shook her head, slow. Number, they never felt remorse. We still do. "Do we?" he asked. The silence that followed was longer than it should have been. Back in the drift, Helena Voss received a secret message from a place that shouldn't have existed anymore. Galen Prime. A council black site, one humanity believed destroyed in the betrayal, but someone had survived. And what they sent changed everything. Video logs, recordings, genetic samples, proof that the council hadn't just lied about the war. They'd used humanity, modified human test subjects, experimental neural control implants, forced indoctrinations, programs to reshape the human mind, to make us more compliant, more malleable. When Earth's diplomats asked about the missing soldiers, they were told classified lost data. But they weren't lost. They were taken. And most never came back. The Council hadn't feared human instability. They had engineered it. When Torin saw the files, he didn't speak for a long time. Eventually, he stood, walked into his private quarters, and sat down in the dark. He had given 30 years to peace, believed in diplomacy, in second chances. But this was something else. This was unforgivable. And now? Now he finally understood why the rage had boiled so deep for so long. Because it wasn't just betrayal, it was violation. The leak hit the galaxy in waves. Helena made sure of it. Hacked council archives, broadcast relays, viral bursts. The truth went everywhere at once. And when the people of the galaxy saw it, when they saw what the Council had done to humanity, to its soldiers, to its children, they didn't just condemn it. They rebelled. Council stations were overrun by their own populations. Riots on Terran 9th. Military collapse in the Perda Nexus. Colonies declaring independence not in solidarity, but in shame, refusing to serve a regime that had committed such horrors. The old council was dead, but in its place, a new evil stirred. From the ruins of the shattered core worlds, a single figure emerged. Kareth Zor, former head of security intelligence, now self-declared executor of preservation. He wore no robes, no ceremonial garb, just a steel uniform and a cold smile. "The humans," he said in his first broadcast, "have exposed a crime. But make no mistake, they are not innocent. They were created to be unstable, to fracture, to burn." He raised his hand, mechanical and gleaming. "They are a threat to all, not because of what we did, but because of what they are." His message ended with a single phrase, burned into every major system. Extinction is not vengeance, it is insurance. The executor wasn't rebuilding the council. He was building a war machine, all or nothing, no treaties, no lines drawn, no humans left standing. And so the tide turned again. Humanity, fractured and furious, now faced a monster it had helped create. The accord was vast, but it wasn't united. And Earth, aching, angry, afraid, stood at a crossroads. Were they still fighting for justice, or were they now just fighting to survive? Because what had started as retribution was becoming something darker. Rain fell over New Kyoto like memory, cold, endless, and heavy. Torin Vex stood under it without an umbrella. The bronze memorial wall before him shimmered with water, the names running like ink in the storm. But they weren't fading. They never would. He reached out, touched one, Ensign Kira Vex, his daughter, disappeared during a joint training operation. One of thousands the council had marked as MIA. Now he knew better. She'd been taken. Used. He hadn't cried when the war started, but he cried now, silently, as the names stared back at him. Because the war was no longer about betrayal. It was about what came next. Behind him, Nyla Varen waited in the rain. "We have a problem," she said softly. He wiped his face. "Just one?" She handed him a datapad. Her eyes didn't leave his. "One of the subjects from Galen Prime came back." They called her Vex now. They didn't know her real name. She didn't remember it. But her blood was human. And her body? Altered. Council tech fused with experimental bio-weaving. A living weapon, created in silence, designed to be obedient. But she wasn't. Not anymore. They found her on a derelict freighter, drifting beyond the Lurian wastes. Every bone in her body had been broken and reknit. Her nervous system? Augmented to the edge of collapse. And her mind was a battlefield. Sometimes she screamed in languages she didn't know. Other times, she recited council command codes in perfect cadence, as if she'd never left their labs. But mostly, she stayed quiet. Watching. Waiting. Vex was brought to a secure Accord facility in orbit around Titanus. Dr. Arlen Greaves, Earth's leading cyber neural specialist, took one look at her and nearly collapsed. "They didn't just program her," he whispered. "They layered her." She could be calm one moment, savage the next, memories overwritten, reflexes that responded before thought. She was a ghost of 1,000 erased soldiers. But when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, fragile. "Do I belong to anyone?" Torin watched from behind the glass. "No," he said softly. "Not anymore." Word of Vex's return spread fast. Some hailed her as a miracle, proof that those lost could be reclaimed. Others called her a weapon, dangerous, unstable, a council sleeper cell waiting to snap. Captain Juno Thane sent a message to Torin directly. "You're risking everything for a ticking time bomb. If she turns, don't expect mercy." Torin didn't respond, but Helena Voss did. She tracked down Juno's vessel in the outer rim, boarded it without permission, and faced the rogue captain, unarmed. "You think revenge makes you strong," Helena said. Juno laughed bitterly. "I think mercy makes you weak." "Number mercy is control. Mercy is knowing you could end them, and choosing not to." Juno's eyes narrowed. "You keep preaching that, Voss. Let's see if it saves you when the Executor finds Earth." Meanwhile, Kareth Zor, Executor of Preservation, was building his fleet in silence. He didn't need volunteers. He had drones, bio-cloned strike legions, AI fleets stripped of conscience, and something worse. He had found the deep codes, the root genetic fail-safes planted in the first human council hybridization experiments. Fail-safes buried in the DNA of Vex. And maybe thousands more, a hidden signal, a switch. He didn't need to beat humanity, he just had to corrupt it. Back on Earth, Vex began to draw. No one gave her pencils. She made them, carved from broken meal trays and melted wall panels. She drew faces. Dozens of them. Smiling, screaming, some with council eyes, some with human hands curled into fists. When Torin entered her cell, she looked up slowly. "They're coming," she whispered. His breath caught. "Who?" She touched one of the drawings. It was a face he recognized. His daughter. Kira Vex. Alive? Or just a memory woven into the shattered mind of a broken soldier? Either way, the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The image haunted him. Her face, Kira's face, drawn by someone who had never known her. The lines were jagged but unmistakable. The curve of her cheek, the faint scar near her left brow. A detail no records carried, not even the military archives. Only her father would know. Torin Vex had stared at that drawing all night. Now he stared into the cold vacuum of space, the resolve coasting quietly beyond the rings of Titanus. Nyla stood beside him, silent. She'd learned not to ask the obvious questions. Eventually Torin spoke. "She's alive." Nyla didn't flinch. "Or Vex was programmed to make you believe she is." "Same outcome," Torin said, voice low. "I have to find her." Deep within the Terran Accord's intelligence division, they traced the origin of the genetic signal Vex responded to. Fragments of neural frequencies, tucked into old code, buried in planetary emissions. Not just tech, but biology. The source? Carshell's Cradle, a former council facility, off the grid, hidden behind the collapsed Singari Belt, a region so unstable most ships wouldn't risk flying through it. It was a graveyard of lost fleets. But if Kira, or others like her, were there, Torin would risk the hell. Meanwhile, Executor Zor's fleet continued to grow. He didn't recruit, he harvested. Every fallen world left behind biotech hybrids, dead flesh with dormant protocols, corpses that became soldiers, minds overridden by machine logic and deep code council programming. The galaxy whispered a new name for them, the Silenced. Vex felt them in her dreams, their pain, their hunger, their emptiness, and in those dreams, she saw Kira, not in chains, not in pain, but leading them, eyes glowing, voice serene. She wasn't broken, she was in control. Torin led the strike force himself, against every Accord advisor's warnings. Nyla insisted on coming, so did Vex. No one knew why she volunteered. She just looked Torin in the eye and said, "I'll know if she's one of us." The jump through the Singari Belt nearly tore the fleet apart. Only 3 ships made it through. Carshell's Cradle was still there, an obsidian husk floating in the black, half buried in asteroid wreckage. No life signs, no communications, just the signal, pulsing, calling. They entered cautiously. Inside, silence, then whispers, recorded screams, flashes of movement, echoes of memories that didn't belong to them. Vex walked ahead, unfazed. She was remembering, They found the chamber deep in the core, a massive hall lined with stasis pods, hundreds of them. Inside, humans, all altered, not asleep, not dead, suspended. And in the center, hooked into a throne of neural conduits, was Kira Vex. Older, changed. Her eyes opened as Torin stepped forward. She didn't blink. "Father," she said, not with warmth, but with cold, clinical certainty. "Why?" he whispered. She tilted her head. "Because they broke me, and then rebuilt me. But they didn't finish." She rose slowly, metal cables detaching from her spine like shed skin. "I did the rest myself." Torin's voice cracked. "Kira, come with me. We can fix this." She stepped forward. "There's nothing to fix." And behind her, the stasis pods lit up, activating. Nyla reached for her weapon. "It's a trap." "No," Kira said. "It's a resurrection." Vex stepped between them. "I know what they did to you," she said. Kira looked at her, something flickering behind her cold eyes. "Then you know why they all have to fall. They're not all guilty. They're all complicit." Vex hesitated. For the first time, something changed in her posture. Her voice softened. "Then what are we?" For a second, Kira faltered. That was all Torin needed. He stepped forward, placing his hand over hers. "You're still my daughter." Tears welled in his eyes. "You're not a weapon. You're not a prophecy. You're Kira." Her lips parted. But before she could answer, the alarm blared. A message, pulsing from the edge of the system. Zor had found them, and he wasn't alone. The stars burned red. The executor had arrived. His fleet spilled from the void like a plague, thousands of ships, faceless and flawless, formed for a single purpose: extinction. The Silenced led the charge, and at their center was Zor's flagship, a black shard of obsidian that pulsed with the stolen code of 1,000 broken minds. Inside Karshell's cradle, alarms howled. Torin stood between his daughter and the end of everything. Kira's hand trembled in his. She could feel the signal screaming in her head. The failsafe Zor had designed to rip her will away, to fold her mind back into the machine. The others in stasis pods had already begun to stir, some screaming, others whispering in council tongues long dead. "I can stop them," she said, her voice cracking. "I can shut it down. All of it." Torin searched her eyes. "At what cost?" Kira glanced back at the throne, the cables, the interface built to consume a mind entirely. "I won't survive it," she whispered. Above the station, Nyla and Vex fought side by side in the hangar as the first wave of Silenced broke through. Vex moved like something half-human, half-nightmare. Silent, swift, efficient. She didn't scream. She didn't bleed. But each enemy she felled brought a flicker of pain to her face. Nyla noticed it. "You're remembering," she said during a lull. Vex nodded, eyes haunted. "Bits and pieces. Flashes. I think I was someone once. Still are." They didn't have time to finish the thought. The hull trembled. Zor's ship had locked weapons. Torin stood before Kira as she connected to the core. "I won't let you die like this," he said, voice cracking. "I already died," she whispered. "Back on that council ship. I only came back because they made me. But now I get to choose what I become." She smiled faintly. "I want to become free." He wanted to pull her back, to hold her like the child she once was. But she was no child. Not anymore. Kira took her place on the throne. Zor's voice echoed across every comm in the system. "You cannot hide behind broken children and ruined ideals. You were made to burn. I'm simply lighting the match." Torin activated the final phase of the Accord's countersignal, linked to Kira's neural interface. Vex patched in from the hangar, her own mind serving as a stabilizer. The strain showed. Blood trickled from her nose, but she didn't stop. The station shook violently, then silence. Kira's eyes glowed bright white. The signal reversed. Across the fleet of silenced, confusion bloomed, a fractured whisper. Memories, faces, music, laughter, grief. The implanted programming cracked. One by one, the silenced began to resist. Not all, but enough. Some ships turned on Zor's command fleet. Others went still, drifting with ghost crews now screaming in confusion. Zor, seeing his machine unravel, gave the final order. Glass the system. Burn it all. But Kira was faster. She opened the core, flooded every relay with raw signal. The backlash shredded her neurons. Her body seized in the throne, muscles tearing under the force of her own liberation. And then, a flash, a ripple. Every ship within 10 light minutes of Carshell froze. Their power grids fried. Systems failed. Minds broke free, or were silenced permanently. Zor's flagship cracked in half. The executor's face never changed, even as the fire swallowed him. On the surface of the cradle, Torin held his daughter's body. She was limp, but her eyes still faintly glowed. A flicker, a trace, a smile. Then nothing. He didn't cry. He couldn't. There was too much awe in him, too much pride. She had saved them. Not just humanity. Everyone. Weeks later, the Accord met in open council. Worlds once enemies now stood together. Rebuilding would take generations. The scars, longer. But the truth was clear. The age of the council was over. And from the ashes of betrayal, something new had begun. A compact built not on dominance or fear, but on choice. Vex stood at the edge of Earth's orbit, watching the sunrise from the deck of the Resolve. She didn't speak often, but when Nyla joined her, she nodded. "You ever figure out who you were?" Nyla asked. Vex shook her head. "Number, but I know who I want to be." Nyla smiled. "That's more than most." As for Torin, he kept walking, from system to system, spreading Kira's name, her truth, not as a warning, but as a legacy, because humanity's rage had once boiled over, but it was our will that endured, and in the end, it wasn't vengeance that saved us. It was forgiveness,